Hello, and welcome to our second episode of our Women in Leadership podcast. Thank you for joining us. That's myself, Sabina from Hudson, McKenzie, and also Mehibe from the Sea Coach. We're coming back again today for a second episode because we did a lot of talking and didn't finish all of our points last time, and we wanted to delve into things a little bit more and to also go through some more points. So before we do that, just in case you missed our first episode, we thought we'd all briefly introduce ourselves again. So I'm Jessica. I work at Hudson McKenzie. I'm in the immigration team, and I've worked in the global mobility space for around 6 to 7 years now. And I'll pass to Sabina to just introduce herself.
Thanks, Jess. My name's Sabina, and I also work at Hudson McKenzie, and I've worked in the immigration field, overseeing both UK and global for about 20 plus years.
Mehibe.
Hi everyone, my name is Mehibe Hill. I'm a leadership coach for leaders in the global mobility space. So I coach heads of, directors of global mobility, as well as senior leaders in immigration, relocation, and across the mobility industry in general.
Cool. Thank you both. So before we kick off and get really stuck into things, I thought I'd run through briefly what we did cover in the first episode that we did. So we started by looking at women in the global mobility industry and how it's such a female-dominated industry and the connections there around kind of empathy and expectation. And then we moved on to talking about imposter syndrome, which was, a really big topic, really interesting to talk about, to Sabina and Mehibe, some really interesting points raised. And then we looked at those feelings of self-doubt, lack of confidence, and moving on then to women being seen in the workplace. And we talked about feeling invisible, and then we talked about feeling hyper-visible as well. And that's kind of where we wanted to pick up again today and kick off there. So Mehibe spoke about hyper-visibility, and it was super interesting and quite enlightening, I think, as well for me anyway, to listen to you talk about that. And you talked a lot about the fear, so the fear that we might feel when it comes to kind of our confidence, pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone, things like that, just to even maybe to be felt visible in the workspace. We wanted to look about that fear and how that can kind of take over and make us feel and impact our day to day.
Yeah, there's so many layers in here when we talk about fear and how fear drives our behaviours. So, let's start with that first part, right? Because there's quite a few parts here. And when we think about fear driving invisibility or hyper visibility, so what we mean by that is that as humans, and I say this, to everyone that I speak to, we all hold fear at any given time, and we might hold multiple fears, and we might have a particular fear that drives a lot of our behaviours. So the fear of invisibility or this hypervisibility generally comes from a fear of judgment. So this is really common for women. We're really afraid of being judged, how people perceive us, and that is present with self-doubt. So the voice of self-doubt is running in cycles, it's talking at us, and it's essentially driving us to hold back because we fear that the judgment will come true. If we think about vulnerability, what that means is pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone, and we're emotionally exposed, and we're exposed to that fear of coming true. So that's where we generally don't push ourselves enough, or we don't embrace courage to do something different. So that fear of judgment, or another coupling fear is fear of not being good enough, not doing enough. That can lead us to essentially hide. If we feel that we're not good enough and we don't believe in ourselves, then we tend to hide. It's easier to mask up and be in the shadow and do good work in the shadow, but not be visible to others. And then there's this idea of hyper visibility, feeling like all eyes are on you. you might be one of only, what the only female on the table or in the discussion, and you might feel as though everything you say, every movement or gesture, all of your behaviours, whether you're in a particular meeting around a table or just generally in your role, that you're hyper visible. So that again connects into that fear of judgment or feeling, a fear of not being good enough. And so that then can drive other behaviours. And, if we're linking it to what you said, Jess, about burnout, then what it leads us to do is to take on other behaviours of overcompensating, doing more than what's expected. And that in itself can be really detrimental to our own health, to our own physical, mental, emotional health, if we think about the triad of well-being. So it feels like that's where we're really starting when we talk about, fear driving invisibility, hypervisibility, and burnout.
Yeah, it's really interesting, I suppose, to think that how detrimental that could be to the individual, but also essentially to employers as well, because I suppose it's impacting the voices in the room. And if you've got something great to contribute and you're not because of that, then I guess that's, that's going to impact the business too. So yeah, it's a really kind of sad situation, really, I suppose. And to kind of maybe overcome those feelings or combat those feelings, maybe what would be, I suppose, your suggestions? Would it be that people just put themselves out there a bit more? Is there anything employers can be doing?
Great question. And this is where I say, come and have coaching. The way that you overcome stuff is you've got to put it into the magnifying glass, right? You've got to address it. You've got to bring it out from the shadow, bring it out from that voice in your head, and
be prepared for
face it.
So be prepared for feeling discomfort, but overcome that, right? Because that's something that, we have to manage as well. Like, well, this is a bit outside, and it's with any work as well, not just being seen, it's taking on a new matter that you're not used to. It's a discomfort. So how would you tackle that? You tackle that behind your desk quite well, hidden. So it's that same feeling, taking that discomfort and just tackling it and just, taking it head on.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, what we see, especially with women and my clients that I'm coaching, is that we can live with that discomfort for a really, really long time. So we normalise that pain and suffering. We normalise that discomfort and it becomes a part of us. But over time, what I see as the detrimental impact is you lose sight of yourself. So we lose that connection with who we truly are and what it means to be comfortable in our own skin. And I use that language quite a lot about having that inner confidence, that assurance, that trust in your own skin. And if we lose sight of which voice in our head is the voice of truth, and the voice of self-doubt is plugging away and it's really noisy and it's there, that discomfort and that pain is a constant nag. They talk about grief being a rock that you carry in your pocket. And over time, that rock, might be a bit smaller and it's still painful, but perhaps it's less pain. But with self-doubt, it's sort of a similar thing, right? That you're carrying this pain around and it's not getting smaller, it's getting bigger over time. And if we leave it unaddressed, it ends up attaching itself to us. It becomes a part of who we are. And what I see is probably the most saddest part, actually, is that we don't give ourselves an opportunity to fulfill our potential or to go for it, to really put ourselves out there and go for the promotion or make the career pivot or say that thing that you've been wanting to say in a meeting that you feel is really fundamental. And so we shrink ourselves. And I see that, I hear this language a lot from my clients. We shrink ourselves, we belittle ourselves. And that is, unfortunately, the power of the voice of self-doubt. And we need to overcome that. And so the only way to do that is to befriend it. You've got to address it face it head on and use it. It's not about dimming, it's not about getting rid of it, it's about dimming it and using the fear that's attached to it to your greater good, fueling, using it as fuel to support you.
Yeah, and I suppose the more you kind of put yourself out there to do that, I suppose maybe the easier it becomes. I mean, it's not a one-fits-all kind of solution, is it? And that's why I suppose the coaching is probably, such an important thing for people to check themselves in to maybe do. But yeah, it's quite sad. I think that, like, you describing it as kind of a weight in your pocket almost makes me think that's not a sustainable way. Eventually that is going to lead to kind of just a bit of a crash and burn, or it's just not sustainable to kind of live like that in the workplace anyway. Yeah,
it's really detrimental to your emotional health.
Yeah,
we hear it often where we say, I'm really hard on myself. We're our own worst enemy, and it comes from all of the emotions and the relationship that we have with ourselves. So what's really sad, I really appreciate you using that emotion to describe the situation, Jess, that it is really sad, because we have the ability within ourselves to turn this around. And yeah, you know what? We are pushing ourselves, and we might be overachievers, and we might be doing the things that we feel we need to be doing or we should be doing, because we talked about that last week, right? Sorry, not last week, in our last episode, where essentially the imposter is showing us that we are on a trajectory of growth. So we are used to pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone. It's just that we're not enjoying it. And that's really sad, because we're giving ourselves a really, really hard time along the way. And that has a real detrimental impact on our emotional and mental health. And that then seeps into other parts of our life, our relationships with our partners, our children, relationships with our friends. And then suddenly, that voice of self-doubt has so much power. And that's where we really need to support ourselves to reframe it and give more power to the voice of truth.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm sure we're all, decision makers at home. We probably lead a lot, if not the majority of, how our house is going to look, the interiors, what we're going to eat tonight, all of that stuff. So we're really great at making decisions at home and leading the way. But yet when it comes to the work environment or, outside environment, we become a different person almost. We're almost like, we have to adapt to a certain way. And I see this already with like my youngest, who's only 4 years old. At school, she's very shy. She won't answer a question. Although she knows the answer, she won't answer it. She'll whisper it. At home, oh my word, totally different. She's the leader. She is, telling everyone what to do. She's so bossy. And that's strange because she's only 4 and she's already adapting to that role already, being one person at home and then a different person outside of home.
Yes.
She's learning to mask up.
Yes,
already.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I'm laughing about it, but having this conversation, because she's only 4 and it's funny to see it right now. But I then think, well, what's that going to look like later on in life? She will become then one of those females that are, holding back.
Yeah, she'll have to book in for some sessions, maybe.
Do you do toddler sessions?
Yeah, start young.
I think it's interesting though, because I think a lot of us maybe are the same, maybe not necessarily that we have this quiet mask at work and then we're flamboyant at home, but even smaller things like my family and maybe friends would describe me as quite a bossy person, but then at work I've never been described as a bossy person, so I don't know if I have like some serious... I'm also a Gemini, so I don't know if that's got anything to do with it, but yeah, I think a lot of us have maybe completely different personalities at home and at work. And I guess just reflecting on the last episode and what we were talking about, I guess the first thing I was wondering about is it generally harder for women to kind of strike that work-life balance and not kind of lead to that burnout is, do we have typically more roles than men do, and can that lead to burnout a bit quicker?
Yeah, great question. Let's reframe work-life balance, because we could spend the whole episode talking about, well, what does that mean, work-life balance? And that might look and feel different to different women, different men, different families, different contexts, different cultures. Ultimately, from my experience as a coach supporting humans in the desired balance level spheres of work and personal and all the other important parts of our life, it comes down to saying no or saying yes, identifying our boundaries, i.e. where there's crossover from one of our spheres of life into the other. Here we're talking about our work role into being ourselves outside of work and what that looks like. Identifying that boundary, what feels good to us. And when I say what feels good to us, and you mentioned personalities, we have a different personality. I feel there sometimes it's more about we hold different values in the workplace versus our family life or our life with friends. And so all of our behaviours highlights a value. If we were to break it down, we could say, oh, that's highlighting professionalism, or that's highlighting decisiveness. Jess, I don't think you're bossy. Perhaps you just make decisions, and you trust your decisions, and you're autonomous, and you're independent, and you're empowered, and you trust yourself. All of those things, which means others might see you and describe you as, in inverted commas, bossy. So we have different values within the workplace and the other spheres in our life, and we make choices based on those. And that is a fundamental piece for me around, are you intentional and mindful about the choices that you make in the crossovers between your worlds or the spheres within your life? And when we feel like the choice has been taken from us, we start to behave in a way that doesn't align with our values or doesn't feel good to us. We can always tap into our emotions, even if we're not aware what our values are. And then we notice, okay, I'm overworking, I'm overcompensating because I need to prove myself. I've said yes to additional projects, even though that's not part of my job description, because I want to get that promotion, or I'm really worried about losing my job, or I'm really scared about what people will think and say about me. So that is where fundamentally we cause our own burnout. And culture is a part of that as well. However, the choice needs to come from the individual, and knowing that there are consequences to our choices. So perhaps there is a real consequence that if I choose to leave work at 5:30 or 6 o'clock every day on my contractual hours, there is a risk that I'm not going to go for a promotion, or they'll find a way to get rid of me. But then for me, there's a question there about, do I want to be a part of that organisation?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is quite complicated, when we think about work-life balance. There's more going on.
And it's also like challenging that sort of the people pleaser side of yourself, always putting yourself last because you feel like you need to do everything else, put everyone else first, your work first, your clients first, your team first. And that's the way to go. But it's not, is it? We feel like that's the requirement for being a good leader, a good female, a good woman, whatever it may be. But it's really challenging that mindset of always having to please people. And you feel like that's the only way you will make, you will advance in your career.
And I suppose if an individual's feeling that hypervisibility in the office as well, then that's maybe impacting some of these choices too. Like they're saying, yes, I'll do this, 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 and this, because they're feeling that there's that expectation that they do, when maybe there isn't even that expectation, and it is just coming from that hypervisibility.
Yes, Jess, you've nailed part of this, right? Which is we have the narrative and the story in our head saying, Mehibe, you've got to do this, otherwise they're going to say this, this, and this about you, or this is going to happen. And so in reality, we can ask ourselves, well, are my fears true, or are people going to judge me for not taking this on? Does it mean that I'm a bad employee if I don't say yes? And a lot of my clients, when we talk about pressure is a really misunderstood thing. Pressure comes from within. Nobody puts pressure on us. It's demands, right? It's how we process external requests into our internal world. And the conflict comes when we have to weigh that up with our self-belief, our strengths and our capabilities, our desires, our aspirations, how we're contextualizing within the situation. And so we pressurize ourselves. That pressure comes from within. It's a manifestation of stuff coming to us and how we process and synthesize that. Nobody makes us feel pressured. We pressure ourselves. So, I was even in a coaching session this morning, came up yesterday, the day before. We talk about pressure, and there's an admit, it's me. I'm the one who's putting pressure on myself. And when we notice that can be quite a bit of a revelation, actually, to notice, I'm creating a lot of the stress for myself. I'm creating a lot of the workload because it's coming from me.
And I suppose even once you have recognised that, it probably takes a lot of time to maybe break out of those kind of thought cycles. Not something that happens overnight, I suppose.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we could be trying to break a thought pattern which is now rooted in strong beliefs about ourselves and beliefs about others, or about how others perceive us. And the work we really need to do is to try and challenge those strong thoughts or those beliefs that have stuck to us or rooted, they've planted. And the way to do that, which we've just done actually together, one way to do it is to bring it into reality. We've got to challenge that thought or belief to say, is that true? Is it 100% true? There's a coach, Byron Katie, who's based in the US, and she talks about doing the work. And they're the fundamental 2 questions that you start with. Is it true? And you might say, yes, it's true. Well, is it all true? Is it 100% true? And then you go, oh, maybe it's not actually. And then it's like, well, who said that? When was that said? And then you start looking for evidence, and then you realize, okay, there's not much going on in reality, actually. If we look at it, it's all in my head. So taking that realistic lens, trying to bring evidence to challenge these really strong thoughts, these really strong beliefs that are now shaping our behaviors, is a very, very important part of the journey. And I do that a lot with my clients. And we can take life experiences, right? We are shaped by our life experiences, but it doesn't necessarily mean that what has happened in the past is true today or true in our future. And unfortunately, we are seeing more trauma in work, a lot of bullying. I'm hearing way too much of this. I'm hearing it every week. Women bullying women, men bullying women, really terrible behaviour. I don't hear it as much with men, but I have heard it as well. I'd say sort of like in terms of the stories I'm told, 20% are coming from men, 80% are coming from women. But we're seeing really bad behaviours that have no consequence. And it's because those people are senior. And because those people are not necessarily held to account. So, when we're dealing with those types of strong thoughts and beliefs, generally they're rooted in some trauma as well, or they could have an association with trauma. And when we think about trauma impacts, trying to stay safe. And so it's easier to stay in the shadow, or if I'm visible, then you feel really hyper visible as well.
Yeah, it's easier to just hide away and just do what you can behind your desk, and and that's safer for you.
I wonder as well, is it something that's hard to recognise yourself? Like, I'm wondering, that's maybe something that's so much easier for an individual to recognise when they talk it out with someone. And like you said, with but is that all true? Is that 100% true? Is it only 80% true? You probably wouldn't have that conversation with yourself on your own. So I guess it's really important to talk about this.
It is really important. And what I notice is where I'm doing this trauma in work coaching and supporting someone to find or regain, claim their inner confidence back, we have to talk about power, because even if we're thinking about burnout, we don't feel that we hold power in our choices. And if we relate the term power to trauma in the workplace, bullying, relentless dismissiveness, the comments, the side comments, making somebody feel small or insignificant, that they're incapable, it leaves an impact. It leaves a trauma impact. And the person who is belittling the other is holding all the power. And what happens as individuals is we also give away our power. And what I do with my clients is we look at how to reclaim some power. Even if it's a small amount, how can we support you to feel a sense of inner power based on feeling hopeless, exhausted, emotionally, mentally drained, feeling like you don't have any trust in your choices, or feeling though you're helpless and hopeless, that you shouldn't go for, other roles, or you should stay where you are, because that's essentially what's been programmed into us. If we're on the end of these sorts of behaviours as well, we end up belittling ourselves. So we need to claim some power back. And that can be in the smallest way. Even, I do a lot of visual work, a lot of work in the body as well. And even personifying, using imagery, personification, metaphors to create space, to give yourself that sense of spaciousness, to go from being small and belittled to something more empowered and stronger and alive and, straight and strong up into the sky. There's a lot of imagery and work we can do in the body, but also reframing so that we can have an opportunity to notice what reclaiming that power might look like or feel like. And sometimes just verbalizing stuff. We're talking about coaching. Well, you have a space to be vulnerable and say stuff out loud. And it's very different when you hear it in your head, that voice of doubt, or who that represents, when you say it out loud and then you bring your voice of truth. This is an exercise I do as well. You bring the voice of truth out, and then they're in a battle. And so the power then starts to be reclaimed by the voice of truth. And it's so powerful to see it as well. And you can make incredible shifts in one session. And you keep working at that, and you've got to keep working on this, because it's not fixed, overnight either.
And it's then making whatever change you've made and being consistent with it, right? So that you can, uphold those boundaries and uphold that, new way of being and working. Because the moment you start crossing over that boundary and you fall back in your old ways, then it starts to send mixed messages. And I think it's that consistency piece that is quite difficult to uphold, right?
Definitely. And the consistency piece can also be the reverse. You go into a new role and you're starting fresh, but you feel like you need to prove yourself. And so then you set yourself up for this behaviour or this perception of how you operate. And then you want to change it. And people asking, well, this isn't who you are, or this isn't who we know, or this isn't how we've seen you. So that in itself can be quite difficult as well. And so sometimes I say, if you move into a new role, this is the fresh start of you setting your boundaries and operating and showing up in a way that you want to show up. So yes, we can break the patterns, of course, and consistency is key, but also giving ourselves an opportunity as well to be seen the way that we want to be seen, even from the beginning. And if you are moving roles, seeing it as a fresh start and trying to give yourself an opportunity to show up differently, noticing what didn't work before and giving yourself a chance to reset almost from a blank page.
I think it's really interesting to think about sometimes where these kind of topics sit with, is it your own responsibility to try and manage this, master this, and then how much of it, could come from the employer. I think a lot of these things they do have to come from within yourself. But then it's sad to think that there's obviously employers out there that are letting some of this kind of bullying happen and this like power mismanagement happen, that's something, you know, surely that lies within the employer's responsibility to try and make sure isn't happening. It's really sad. Again, sad.
And disappointing, right? That in 2025, this is still happening. And I'm going to be really open and honest and frank about this. A lot of the bad behaviour that we see comes in HR. You know, it comes from really senior leaders in HR. How many times I've heard the CHRO is misbehaving again. And unfortunately, the more senior the leader is, that person is, the more value, or the more the higher this perception of indispensability. So it is the responsibility of the organisation. However, if you have something happening like that in HR, then the system's broken, right? Because HR is responsible for their people. And, you know, I'm saying that because this is what I'm hearing from a lot of my clients. And of course, we see bad behaviours and this happens in other functions as well. But it's very, very hard when you've got somebody who is essentially supposed to be the hell of the system, of the organisation, essentially the root cause or part of it. So how can you change culture? And that's where I truly believe that the C-level, in terms of the CEO and others within that C-suite, need to be more attuned to what is happening in their organisations to ensure that people are held accountable and responsible. And unfortunately, you know, I could name individuals on one hand, if not more, that are paid out. You know, they're paid out of their organisations to essentially keep quiet. And that's a really, really sad and disappointing place that we've got to. But the reality is that the bad behaviour doesn't have a consequence, and people have no choice but to leave. And sometimes the only fair way to leave is to get paid out for it, which can feel a little bit as well, right? That you're sort of turning away and getting paid out for it. But there has to be some consequence to the organisation. And this is happening so much more than we think. Or no.
Because then that trauma then carries with you throughout now, and then that's where you struggle to break that cycle, because you're still thinking about that trauma from the previous time that you had to, you know, deal with that situation, and you're constantly checking your back, like, is this going to happen again? And I suppose that's how it feels, right?
Yeah, but they're my clients. You've just described, you know, men and women that I'm working with. They carry that trauma with them. And the reality is that trauma that was in the previous organisation, that trauma will happen again, because that individual who was responsible for it is still there.
Yeah.
And that's a really tough pill to swallow as well. You know, that's really tough to think about, that there are these individuals that essentially can get away with it, don't have any consequence, and they will be responsible for others' mental health and emotional burnout.
We touched really briefly last time on we mentioned like periods and menopause, and I remember as soon as we stopped hitting record, I said to Mehibe, I'm so glad you mentioned those things, because they still feel taboo. It still feels like, oh my god, can I say menopause? Can I say period? Can we talk about this? And we all said afterwards, well, yeah, we absolutely must talk about this, because it's not talked about enough, and there probably isn't enough support in place that employers provide for women. I think maybe we're slowly getting there now. The conversations are opening up, but we're just not quite there yet. So I guess what we maybe want to talk about is what these struggles look like and what could be put in place potentially for women in the workplace.
Yeah, we touched on it, didn't we? There was mention of women experiencing miscarriages, the impact of the menstrual cycle, perimenopause, going through menopause, hitting that sort of unattractive age just before retirement as well. It is
IVF as well.
That's IVF, yes. And I know a lot of women who have had IVF, which, you know, I haven't had IVF, I'm a woman, I still have my menstrual cycles and know what it's like to deal with hormones up and down. I think we've all been there. I think we are all there, right?
Yeah.
And it's not easy on on sort of a normal day, let alone if you're having IVF and you're being pumped with hormones. And the reality is that we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about the impact of hormones. You're just expected to get on with it, kind of be normal in inverted commas, and just show up. And there are multiple dimensions or levels of this invisible pain and suffering, the rock, right? The rock that we carry around as women. And again, I think because we normalize it so much, we just get on with it. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about this and I thought, wouldn't it be an interesting world if men also had something like periods or, had to deal with the hormone cycle going up and down and just not knowing, not really knowing how you're going to feel from one day to the next. And we can't even say that you can predict it. It's the unpredictability, that's the word I was looking for. Because, a lot of women don't have sort of a standard cycle of 28 days or 30 days, whatever it's supposed to be. And so you can't always predict as well and plan how you're going to feel. What are the measures that organisations can put in place? This is a really tough question. I can truly hand on heart say I don't know what the answer is to it. However, what I feel is really important is feeling like we have somebody to talk to about it. Mm. Feeling that we have a choice to say, I can't go to that meeting, or I can't push myself so much that I am jeopardizing my health by prioritizing my work. And I feel that is where we can help women to have that choice to prioritize their health over the company's wider interest. And I feel as a reasonable person, you can make good choices based on that. And if we could start there, even as a normal practice, to make it okay to say, I can't come to that meeting, or can I move it without the fear of being judged, then I feel that's a small thing, but could make a really big difference.
Yeah. I think if we rewind years and years and years ago, when the workplace in general was predominantly men, I suppose all the standards set don't then suit women so much in the workplace, if that makes sense. So it's so wild though that these conversations are only starting to happen in kind of this decade now. I mean, women have been in the workplace for decades and decades now, and yet we're only just starting to say, like, is mat leave suitable? Is pat leave suitable? What can we do for periods? What can we do for menopause, miscarriage, all of that? It's crazy that it's taken so long, really, I suppose is what I'm saying. It's sad. Yeah.
Yeah.
I always wonder, like, I've never obviously been on a mat leave. I don't have any children, but I know I took quite a big gap out of like a corporate role, and when I came back, it was to work here at Hudson McKenzie, and I was terrified to come back into the workplace after having a year off. And I wonder if that's really similar when women come back from mat leave. I suppose, is there those feelings of that hypervisibility, I suppose, and those insecurities?
Absolutely, and I can talk on that, having been on mat leave twice. You do go off, and if you're taking off the full mat leave, which is 12 months, you're literally confined, or you don't have to be confined, but you're literally at home with a baby and you're speaking nothing but baby language. And then to come back after 12 months and get back into your professional persona, and it's hard to get back into, and especially if there's been and so many changes can happen in 12 months. I think the last time I came back, the first time, where I went on mat leave, I came back and Brexit had occurred. So there's a lot going on in that space, with clients, within the team. And it was really difficult, because not only was it my first, it was also, I had taken such a long break. What's changed? Am I going to fit in? oh wow, you know, how do I become visible now? You know, how can I mark my place in the firm now? And all of that does resonate, definitely, Jess. And, you know, similar to you, just taking that time off, and then coming back into a working environment, it's difficult to adapt to. And especially when you've got a baby to also consider, how are they settling in a nursery? You get that mum guilt, everything. It's all that emotion that comes rushing to you. And it takes a good 12 months of going back into your role, working environment, professional environment, to start figuring out your place and how to schedule and how to, do everything again.
And I suppose that's where the employer's responsibility maybe comes in, to make sure there are things put in place that help you settle back in, that catch you up on technical knowledge, the news. I don't know if there's new team members and all of that. I suppose that's something maybe employers should be really thinking about, making sure they have a good structure for that.
Oh, for sure. You'd hope that the forward-thinking organisations of 2025 and beyond would have integration plans. And you're hearing it more and more of, you know, mums having certain touch points before they come back into the workplace. And we are seeing more use of what we refer to as integrative coaching or integration coaching, where, you know, someone like Sabina in their position who's been disconnected for such a long time, to have somebody to support them emotionally and mentally to integrate back. And yes, there is that period of not being a part of the organisation, 12 months, you know, as a sort of a general rule of thumb. But there's also this separation of connect, and as humans, we want to connect. So there's usually a fear of not belonging, or feeling disconnected, or feeling like you're not going to be able to be a part of the tribe again, or be a part of the people. And, you know, I sort of hear this more and more, that people are afraid to take longer mat leaves because they're worried about what it's going to be like when they get back. Will their friends be there? Will it be the same people, culture? That's quite scary, you know, going back into something that's completely new and fresh again. And what we can do is support women to feel more connected. And that can be in different ways, and that can be whilst they're away, if they want that, you know, as they're coming back into the organisation, having a coach, having a buddy, you know, meeting the team, you know, as and when they want to. So there are things that can be put in place, and ensuring that we're not putting demands on, you know, mums that are coming back. But I think we've made good headway in, you know, terms of flexibility and ensuring that mums have a choice in terms of the days that they're working, you know, being able to go part-time. But again, it depends if you're feeling that pressure internally that you don't have the choice to do that because there might be a repercussion. That can be a really difficult place to be. So we've made some headway, but there's definitely more that we can do.
I guess we have to keep talking about it and hope that employers keep listening, and I think that's the way that each individual employer would find the best way to kind of support with all those different topics within their company.
We need more legislation as well. Let's be honest. We need more legislation that's on the side of women as well. If you're going through IVF, if you've miscarried, there's no real protections for women there, and so you're at the mercy of how kind or patient your employer is going to be. I know some women who have miscarried 3, 4, 5, 6 times, or going through IVF, you know, in a number of rounds, and they are essentially punished for taking that time out, or for being sick, or not being themselves, you know, their normal sort of, I say normal in inverted commas, then their standard functioning self. And that's not right. That shouldn't be allowed, and we need to have more protection via the government to give women the space to essentially be the role of a mum, and women have to give birth, men can't do it, so we need more protection. We need more protection for women, and that's got to come through legislation as well. And I'm going to share something absolutely terrible. I miscarried at work and just went back into my job. It was during lunchtime. 30 minutes on the toilet, half an hour, went and got some air, and didn't feel like I could talk to anyone, and just went back to work. And it was very, very early, within a few weeks, so, but to feel like I didn't have a choice to say something and feel judged by it, or not feel like I could take the afternoon off. I mean, that's a terrible place to be, and it does happen. And it's happening in the shadows. Women are afraid to talk about this. I haven't said that really out loud to a lot of people, but it's okay. It was a really, really long time ago, but that happens so often. Who are you going to go and talk to? And sometimes our line manager is not even in the same country, right? Or the same time zone. So how do we ensure that women have somebody that they can talk to whenever they need? And that feels really important as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you both for such an interesting and honest conversation today.
It's felt tough, right? I think the theme of sadness has been quite a tough conversation, but this is reality, isn't it? This is the reality that we face. Yeah. And it's good we can talk about it and be open and honest, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who are suffering in silence, suffering in the shadows, and they don't need to. So making sure that you've got a friend you can talk to, somebody that you can air what's happening inside of you, just even having that is hopefully some relief, and giving some softening and light to the pain and suffering.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I guess we'll finish up there. Again, it's been super interesting, and thank you both so much for such a good and honest conversation. Thank you for listening. We're Hudson McKenzie, here to guide people and businesses through the complex transitions of global mobility with clarity, care and understanding. Our vision is simple, a world where crossing borders feels seamless, human and full of opportunity. If this episode resonated with you, please give our podcast a rating and share it with others who might find it inspiring. See you next time for another conversation on leadership, law and life across borders.